392 AD. We begin in Milan with the sudden death of Valentinian II.
A very young man.
Only 21. And for 4 years, he had been propped up, or perhaps, manipulated by his highly powerful Frankish general Arbogast.
Right.
The official explanation was suicide, but nobody, especially not those who mattered, was buying it.
No, suicide was the convenient story, let's say. But Arbogast's control over the young emperor had become total, and the Western court was deeply uneasy. When Valentinian II dies, his sister, Galla—
Who's married to Theodosius, the Eastern emperor.
Exactly, the connection is key. She immediately screams bloody murder. And this isn't just family grief. Galla's insistence is a brilliant political move.
How so?
Because it legally obligates Theodosius to act. An emperor has been murdered. His sister is demanding justice. He has to investigate. And Arbogast knew this investigation would end with his own removal and, very likely, his execution.
So Arbogast decides he must seize the initiative, but he realizes military action alone won't work. He needs, legitimacy?
Legitimacy. And he finds it by exploiting the deep, bitter religious divisions still running through the Roman Senate and the traditional Roman elite.
So he plays the religion card.
He plays it masterfully.
Yeah.
He chooses a civil servant named Eugenius as his puppet emperor. Crucially, Eugenius is a Christian, but one who is sympathetic to the old pagan state religion.
That's a very fine line to walk.
That nuances everything. Arbogast and Eugenius promise the Roman Senate that they'll restore the altar of victory to the Senate house in Rome.
Which Theodosius' side had taken down.
Precisely. So this frames the whole conflict not just as a fight between two generals over a puppet throne, but as an existential ideological conflict. They are weaponizing the divide between pagan tradition, the historical ancient identity of Rome, and the newly imposed Nicene Christianity championed by Theodosius.
Theodosius, the Eastern emperor, sees this for the power play it is. He doesn't bother negotiating with Eugenius, does he?
Not for a second. Instead, he simply names his own 8-year-old son, Honorius, as the rightful Western emperor.
8 years old?
8. I mean, that is an act of total contempt for Arbogast's authority.
And with that, the war is official. So Theodosius prepares for war. And the way he does it, it's fascinating and kind of sows the seeds of future destruction, doesn't it?
It really does. He needs massive military force, so he hires huge amounts of Gothic foederati.
Can you just remind us what foederatis are?
Of course. These are troops who fight for Rome, but are led by their own commanders. Crucially, they are loyal to the commander who pays them. Not necessarily to the Roman state itself, they're mercenaries, basically, but organized as entire peoples.
And amongst these Gothic commanders is a name that will define the next 2 decades. Alaric.
Alaric. But the man truly driving Theodosius' army is his general and son-in-law, Stilicho. And we really need to pause here because Stilicho is the defining figure of the subsequent Western tragedy.
Absolutely. Talk about Stilicho. What's his deal?
He's incredibly capable, a military genius, and loyal to Theodosius. But he has one political vulnerability that defines his entire life.
Yeah.
He is half Vandal.
So barbarian blood in the eyes of the Senate.
Exactly. In the eyes of the xenophobic Roman elite, his barbarian blood made him permanently ineligible for the imperial purple. This created a ceiling for his ambition, even as he was made the most powerful man in the West.
So he was forced to be emperor in practice while facing constant suspicion.
That's a perfect way to put it, and it's a key emotional thread throughout this entire period.
So this massive, diverse army marches west, setting the stage for the showdown at the Battle of the Frigidus River in September 394 AD. The historical sources themselves acknowledge that the stakes had never been higher.
They did. This was a battle for the soul of the Roman world. It was the final armed confrontation between the pagan revivalists and the Christian Empire.
And the historians of the time, they saw the symbolism of it right away.
Immediately, they recognized it was the last time the entire Roman Empire would ever be united under a single ruler, Theodosius. And because of the religious framing, the accounts of the battle are, they're laced with explicit descriptions of divine intervention that we need to zoom in on.
Orosius, for example, the Christian historian. He's adamant that Theodosius gave the sign of the cross as the signal to attack.
Which is such a powerful image. That one small gesture redefined the conflict for posterity. It's not just a battle, it's a crusade.
And then we get the really extraordinary accounts. We have not 1, but 3 separate Christian historians recording a literal, massive, divine wind.
A divine wind, yeah. This wind was supposedly so powerful it physically forced the Western Army's arrows back into their own bodies.
That's incredible.
It's a remarkable detail because it serves as perfect theological propaganda. The pagan-supported weapons were literally turned against them by the hand of God. It wasn't just a physical victory. For them, it was a divine decree.
And to give it even more texture, Sozomen includes this almost absurd anecdote.
The demon, yes.
Tell us about the demon.
While Theodosius was praying in a nearby church during the battle, a demon actually appears. It taunts the Christian cause, gloats that the battle's going badly for the Christian side, and then, as the momentum shifts and the wind begins to blow in Theodosius's favor, the demon just fades away.
So the sources are telling us this was a metaphysical struggle, not just a tactical one.
Absolutely. The reality of the victory, however, lay with the immense military prowess of the Gothic auxiliaries and Stilicho's command.
Right, the wind helps, but the soldiers do the work.
The soldiers do the work. It was Stilicho and Alaric who led the wings that ultimately destroyed the Western Army. Eugenius was killed the same day. Arbogast, the general who had staked his claim on a pagan revival, killed himself the next. Theodosius was triumphant, having united East and West.
But the union was fleeting. I mean, incredibly fleeting. 1 year later, in 395 AD, Theodosius dies.
And that's it. His death immediately locked in the permanent split. He left the entirety of the Roman world to his two extremely young and very unequal sons.
Arcadius, the 18-year-old, takes Constantinople and the Eastern Empire.
And Honorius, the 10-year-old, inherits the increasingly vulnerable Western Empire, with its capital nominally in Rome, but its court often in Milan.
And the critical factor is guardianship.
It's all about the guardians. Stilicho, the half-Vandal general who just won the war, is appointed Honorius' guardian. He effectively becomes the ultimate power in the West, though he can never hold the title.
And in the East?
In the East, the power vacuum is filled by the army officer Rufinus, who becomes the puppet master for the very mild Arcadius. And the sources make it clear that power and wealth flowed into the hands of these two men, Stilicho and Rufinus.
So you have these two twin unofficial emperors.
And they immediately begin to view each other as rivals for control of the entire Roman world. This sets the stage for the next section, the immediate, brutal clash between the divided halves.
Okay, so the tension between Stilicho and Rufinus was the political fissure. But the military crack was opened by a man who felt utterly betrayed by the victory at Frigidus. Alaric. He had commanded the Gothic troops, delivered the critical victory for Theodosius, and he fully expected a massive reward.
He didn't just want gold, though. He wanted Roman prestige and stability. He hoped for the top military command, the title of Magister Militum Master of Soldiers.
A position held by Stilicho.
The very same. But he was denied.
And why? Why was he denied?
And the reason for the denial, as recorded by the sources, was painfully clear: his Gothic blood. The Roman Senate and the political establishment, even under the Christian Theodosius, could not stomach giving that much authority to a full-blooded Goth, even one who had just saved the empire.
This denial fueled the already intense resentment felt by his Gothic army.
Oh, massively. If we look back at the Battle of the Frigidus, the Goths had suffered horrifically. They took over 10,000 casualties.
1,000.
They rightly suspected they had been used as human shields, as cannon fodder, to protect the lives of the traditional Roman legions. They fought and died for Rome, only to be denied the honor they deserved.
So this specific cocktail of perceived betrayal, heavy loss, and racial or ethnic disdain, it sparks something huge.
It sparks a monumental historical event, the creation of the Visigoths. Alaric rejects Roman service entirely. He takes command of his disgruntled army, declares himself king of the Visigoths, and essentially creates a newborn independent nation overnight.
This is a perfect point to pause and dig into that concept you mentioned earlier, ethnogenesis. It sounds academic, but it's critical here. This wasn't just like a rebranding of an existing tribe, was it?
Not at all. That's a great question. Prior to this, the various Gothic groups were a loose, shifting collection of Germanic tribes. The terms Ostrogoth and Visigoth were, as you said, often just vague geographic labels. This was different.
How so?
Alaric's act created a cohesive, highly motivated military unit bound together not by ancient bloodlines, but by shared purpose, shared resentment toward Rome, and shared necessity, the need for land.
So they gave themselves a name, a history, and a royal lineage right there and then.
Pretty much. And they were now independent, resentful, and strategically positioned inside the borders of the Western Empire. They weren't invaders yet. They were a hostile, self-constituted people existing within Roman territory, entirely unbound by Roman treaties. And they were hungry for a home.
And Alaric's first act as king was to begin raiding the Roman provinces, setting a course toward Constantinople.
Right, and the Eastern Court, controlled by Rufinus and the weak Arcadius, was utterly incapable of resisting this onslaught. They deployed most of their best troops to fight Theodosius's war in the west the year before.
So naturally, Rufinus appeals to Stilicho, the military genius in the west.
Of course, and Stilicho, ever eager to extend his influence eastward, happily obliges and sends western troops. But as those troops marched, they carried two sets of orders, one public, one lethal.
Here we go.
Indeed. Stilicho instructed the western troops to join the eastern army. When the western general, Gainas, reached the walls of Constantinople, Arcadius and Rufinus came out for the traditional ceremony and greeting. And the sources, Claudian and Zosimus, give us chillingly similar accounts of what happened next.
It's the stuff of nightmares.
It is. The Western soldiers slowly began to encircle Rufinus as he walked alongside the emperor. A soldier, acting under direct orders from Stilicho, drew his sword and rushed Rufinus, reportedly shouting, "It is the hand of Stilicho that smites you,"
Wow, he calls him out by name.
by name. And the resulting attack was absolutely savage. It was designed to be a psychological statement to the entire Eastern Court.
So what did they do?
Rufinus was pierced with spears, torn limb from limb. The troops plucked out his eyes while he was still alive and laid bare the ribs of his cleaved spine. It was a message sent through extreme violence. Stilicho had long-range control over the entire military apparatus, and he would eliminate anyone who stood in the way of his ultimate power.
The official story from the West was always that the soldiers acted spontaneously, right? Out of loyalty.
That was the cover story. But the sources are united that this was Stilicho's strategic assassination, designed to cement his power over both halves of the empire.
But violence begets ambition, and a new adversary immediately filled the void.
The courtier Eutropius, a eunuch.
And Eutropius is described by Zosimus as being intoxicated with wealth and arrogant in his sudden elevation.
He was also clever. He knew he couldn't beat Stilicho's legions. Stilicho was the military master, so Eutropius used the only tool he had that was potentially superior to Stilicho's:
Which was.
Roman law.
And this is critically important.
This is the pivotal moment. Eutropius convinced the Emperor Arcadius to declare Stilicho the guardian of the West, an enemy to the empire, by public legal decree.
So the split becomes official, legally enforced, politically toxic.
Exactly. Eutropius couldn't deploy armies against Stilicho, but he could make Stilicho an outlaw in the East, removing the legal basis for Stilicho to intervene in Eastern affairs. This formal legal decree was the visible crack in the single Roman domain.
The duality of the empire was no longer just geography.
It was law, solidified by the blood of Rufinus and the ambition of a new courtier.
While Stilicho was now officially outlawed in the East, the structural weaknesses of the Western Empire were being exposed by a crisis in North Africa. And this crisis connected directly back to the Stilicho-East rivalry.
It did. North Africa was historically crucial because it was the breadbasket of Rome itself. In 397, Gildo, the provincial leader known as the Comes Africa, the Count of Africa, revolted.
And let me guess who was behind it.
And guess who convinced Gildo to shift his loyalty from the Western Emperor Honorius to the outlawed Eastern court of Arcadius and Eutropius? Eutropius himself. This was the East's counterstrike against Stilicho.
The geopolitical stakes immediately became existential for Rome. North Africa was the primary supplier of grain.
So when Gildo stopped the corn shipments, the city of Rome quickly faced hunger and eventual starvation. Stilicho was forced to respond to the famine, which was, in itself, a strategic victory for Eutropius.
So Stilicho convinces the Senate to declare war. Gildo was powerful, commanding 70,000 men.
A huge force. And Stilicho could only scrape together a tiny expeditionary force of 5,000 men.
And the command of this minuscule army was given to Massazel, who was Gildo's brother.
That's not just a military appointment. It's a deeply personal move. As Gildo had previously murdered Massazel's two sons, Massazel was driven by absolute vengeance.
And the resulting battle is almost darkly farcical, especially when you consider Gildo's overwhelming numbers. Massazel's tiny force won with practically no casualties.
Yeah, the victory was less tactical and more a psychological accident. During the fighting, Massazel, in a fit of rage, struck his own standard bearer.
Okay.
The standard bearer dropped the staff, and Gildo's vast army, seeing the dropped standard, immediately interpreted it as a prearranged signal for mass surrender.
You're kidding.
70,000 men laid down their arms at once. Gildo killed himself trying to flee.
It's astonishing, a full-scale existential civil war decided by a misunderstanding over a dropped banner.
It is.
Yeah.
But Stilicho secured the grain supply, saving Rome from famine, and that diplomatic and military victory immediately undermined Eutropius.
Who then meets the same fate as Rufinus.
The exact same fate,
Yeah.
executed at the demand of the very Goth general, Gainas, who had served Stilicho. The political machinery of the empire was utterly, chaotically relentless.
But while this turmoil was tearing the empire apart physically, an intellectual and theological anchor was being developed in Africa, entirely separate from the courts of Ravenna or Constantinople.
By Augustine.
Augustine. He became Bishop of Hippo Regius in 396, right as the chaos began accelerating. To understand his response, we need to revisit his journey. He was a highly educated native African who had spent years as a Manichae.
And the Manichaean belief system was rooted in dualism. The universe was defined by eternally opposed, equally powerful forces of good and evil, and matter itself was evil. This offered a clear, unambiguous answer to the problem of suffering.
His conversion, detailed in his Confessions, was sparked by a deeply personal moment.
The story of the child's voice. Hearing a child chant, pick up and read, which led him to St. Paul's epistle to the Romans. He describes feeling a light of relief from all anxiety flooded into my heart. He found certainty in Christ, dispelling the shadows of doubt from his dualistic past.
But when he returned to Africa, he found the church itself was engaged in a civil war that was just as fierce as the political one plaguing Rome, the Donatist crisis.
It was. This wasn't about God, really. It was about purity.
What was the Donatist argument?
The Donatists insisted that the validity of sacraments hinged on the moral character of the priest administering them. The crisis went back a century to the Diocletian persecutions, where some clergy, known derisively as the traditores.
Those who handed over scriptures.
Exactly. They had surrendered holy texts to Roman authorities to save their lives.
And the Donatists were still incensed that these priests, or those ordained by them, were allowed to officiate a century later.
Right. Their argument was a form of theological Puritanism. If the priest is unworthy or sinful, how can the baptism or the Eucharist he performs be valid? They insisted the church must be a purely holy body, purged of anyone who had compromised with the fallen world.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, why was this 100-year-old debate so potent right now in 396?
Because political identity, what it meant to be a loyal Roman, was dissolving rapidly. The Donatists were seeking a controlled, unambiguous, and purified identity, the one institution they believed should be eternal and flawless: the church.
They needed certainty in a time of radical political chaos.
That's the core of it. And Augustine spent years fighting them, particularly their leader, Petilianus. Augustine's foundational theological response was brilliant and ultimately formed the basis for Catholic orthodoxy.
What did he argue?
He argued that the power of grace comes entirely from God's will, not from the character of the man administering the sacrament. To argue otherwise, as he put it, suggested that man could make his neighbor free from sin, which is blasphemous.
And he had this metaphor for the church on earth.
The corpus permixtum, a mixed body. He used the analogy of a net containing both good fish and bad. It is impossible and arrogant, he argued, for men to attempt to purify the church now. Only Christ, at the end of time, will separate the pure from the fraudulent.
So he was insisting on ambiguity and divine control over purity.
Directly countering the Donatists' desperate need for human-imposed certainty in their collapsing world.
That distinction, the acceptance that the church is inherently flawed and mixed, is the key philosophical backdrop to the collapse of the Western Empire. It meant that perfection could not and should not be sought in any earthly institution.
The theological debates continued, but the political crisis was about to become catastrophic. Alaric still denied the homeland he craved wasn't going to wait around. In 400 AD, he invaded northern Italy, and this was not just a punitive raid.
Right. What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of the movement. Alaric brought not just his fighting men, but also the women and children.
Yes, this was an entire nation of Visigoths moving together. They intended to settle permanently inside Roman territory. They wanted a home, not just plunder.
And the immediate reaction from Emperor Honorius and the Western court was a dramatic, physical act of retreat.
A retreat that signaled the visible shrinking of the empire. They fled from Milan and established their capital in Ravenna.
Why Ravenna?
Ravenna was naturally protected. It's surrounded by swamp and marshland, making it virtually impregnable. But it was also a strategic cul-de-sac.
It's highly symbolic. They were prioritizing self-preservation over effective defense or counterattack.
Exactly. The Western Empire was visibly entrenching itself, retreating behind swamp walls, acknowledging that its ability to project power across its own territory was diminished.
Meanwhile, the East was facing its own leadership crisis. Arcadius, the Eastern emperor, had fathered a son, Theodosius II.
And given the lethal political climate Rufinus assassinated, Eutropius executed Arcadius was terrified that any courtier in Constantinople would exploit the boy's isolation and kill him to seize power.
So, in an astonishing move that highlights the total breakdown of trust within the Roman system, Arcadius turned to Rome's great rival,
The Persians.
the Persians.
Yes. He sent a delegation to the Persian king, Yazdegerd I, requesting that the non-Roman king act as the legal guardian for his infant son.
That's unbelievable.
It is. Procopius, one of the historians in our sources, notes that Arcadius trusted the Persian king, who had a track record of stable and peaceful relations, more than he trusted any of his own generals or courtiers.
That really reveals the level of paranoia and self-destruction ripping through the Roman elite.
It does. But back in the West, Stilicho, the guardian of the shrinking empire, finally managed to confront the Visigoths at the Battle of Pollentia in 402 AD.
He halted the invasion, but even this victory is tarnished by an act of deep cynicism.
Yes. The battle took place on April 6, which was Easter weekend. Alaric, though considered a barbarian by Rome, was an Arian Christian and expected the fighting ban, the truce, during the Holy Period, to be honored.
But Stilicho ignored it.
He entirely ignored this prohibition, launching a surprise attack on the unsuspecting Goths. It was a victory won through dishonorable means, highlighting the desperate, pragmatic ruthlessness required to save the Western state.
In fact, Claudian records Stilicho's rallying cry, and it's just full of desperation. He says, "Win a victory now and restore Rome to her former glory. The frame of empire is tottering. Let your shoulders support it."
The frame of empire is tottering. The message is clear. The empire is visibly falling apart, and only ruthless action will save it.
Stilicho won. He defeated Alaric and crucially captured Alaric's wife.
Which forced a treaty. Alaric retreated across the Alps, still without the permanent homeland he had sought, but with his core army intact and his resentment deepened.
Despite the temporary reprieve, the frame of empire continued to totter, as Stilicho put it. The chaos reached a climax around 407.
Right. The situation in Britannia had become untenable. The best Roman armies had long been pulled across the Channel for Stilicho's earlier struggles. The exasperated remnants of the Roman army there proclaimed their own general, Constantine III, emperor.
And he immediately invaded Gaul and Hispania.
So the West now had three competing emperors.
This is the critical moment where the external pressures combine with internal betrayal. Honorius, now 23, asserts his independence from Stilicho.
He listens to rumors, likely manufactured by the xenophobic court official Olympius, that Stilicho plans to seize the throne by marrying his own son to Honorius' sister, Placida.
Placida, who is 18 and raised in Stilicho's household, this was seen as the ultimate play for the purple.
It's a profound tragedy when you remember the man's whole career. Stilicho, the half-Vandal who saved Italy twice, who had been fiercely loyal to Theodosius and his sons, was undone by the very xenophobia that had denied him the ultimate title his entire life.
And Honorius believed the treason accusations.
He did. On August 23, 408, the emperor in practice was arrested and executed at Ravenna. His executioner, Olympius, then ordered a massacre of all the Gothic soldiers and their families who were loyal to Stilicho.
Which essentially purged the very military forces that had been defending Italy.
This decision was beyond catastrophic.
It's almost surreal, the indifference of the ruling power to its own survival. They killed the only man capable of defending them and then slaughtered his best soldiers. The source material makes it clear. The execution of Stilicho was the single greatest strategic blunder of the Western Empire.
And it paved the way directly for the final humiliation. Stilicho's death was exactly the gift Alaric had been waiting for.
He immediately returned from Central Europe.
Immediately. With his most formidable enemy gone, and the Roman defense mechanisms dismantled by the massacre of the Gothic soldiers, Alaric found his path to Rome unopposed. He laid siege to the city immediately.
And the Senate had no choice but to negotiate. They paid an enormous ransom to lift the siege. The list of payments is legendary and tells you everything about the priorities of Rome at the time.
It really does. 5,000 pounds of gold, 30,000 pounds of silver, 4,000 silken tunics, 3,000 pieces of dyed leather.
And my favorite detail, 3,000 pounds of pepper.
That detail about the pepper is incredible. It shows that in a city facing starvation and plague, Highly concentrated luxuries like pepper were still considered extremely valuable. It signals the wealth held by the elite, even under siege.
So Alaric took the wealth, but he repeated his demand.
A homeland for his people in Illyricum.
Honorius, still safely holed up in the impregnable swamp city of Ravenna, refused the demand for land.
This is the moment of peak imperial cynicism. Ravenna was safe, so Honorius simply didn't care about the people of Rome.
This indifference is further highlighted by an earlier famous anecdote. When the desperate remnants of the military in Britannia appealed for help against the barbarians, Honorius effectively gave up the entire province.
Sending them a curt reply to cope on their own.
That phrase, cope on their own, is perhaps the most eloquent 3 words ever spoken about the late Western Empire.
It summarizes the abandonment of the periphery by a central authority that was only concerned with its immediate personal safety.
And because of this attitude, Alaric fulfilled his threat, laying siege to Rome a second time.
Rome suffered terribly. Starvation, plague. The desperation was so great that the Senate decided they could no longer rely on the distant, indifferent Honorius. They tried a radical move.
Creating their own puppet emperor, a cardboard emperor.
Exactly. They declared a senior senator named Attalus as emperor. The intention was to install a man who would negotiate and secure the land deal.
And Alaric, in turn, accepted this arrangement, making himself Attalus's Magister Militum.
The top military official, the exact honor Stilicho had held, and the title Alaric had been denied years before. He was the ruler of Rome in all but name.
To seal this incredible arrangement, a crucial hostage exchange took place. And here we had another thread that runs into the future.
Yes. One of the Roman hostages sent to live among the Visigoths was a 14-year-old boy named Aetius, the son of a high official.
And this boy would spend his formative years growing up among the Goths, learning their ways, their language, their tactics.
And he would return decades later to become the last great general of the West.
So the empire was now descending into terminal chaos. You had 4 men claiming the imperial title in the West.
Honorius in Ravenna, Attalus in Rome, Constantine III in Gaul, and a Roman official in Hispania. The binding political and religious glue had completely worn away. Only the rule of force remained.
But the puppet regime didn't last. The cardboard Emperor Attalus quickly alienated Alaric.
He did. Attalus refused to place a Visigoth commander in charge of Roman soldiers, calling it a deep disgrace. That same deeply rooted anti-barbarian xenophobia that had undone Stilicho and fueled Alaric's original rebellion years earlier was still paramount, even on the brink of collapse.
This was the final unforgivable insult.
It was. Alaric had done everything Rome demanded, yet the Senate's prejudice prevented his legitimate power from ever being formally recognized. Incensed, Alaric ordered Attalus to meet him, stripped him of his purple robe and diadem in public, and imprisoned him.
And then he marched back toward Rome for the 3rd and final time. Driven by bitterness and fury that recognition for his immense skill and power was perpetually denied due to his ancestry, the dam broke in August 410 AD.
The sack of Rome in 410 was not the complete physical destruction often imagined. Alaric ordered his soldiers to spare the churches and not commit unnecessary massacre.
But the plunder was extensive, riches were stolen, and fires were set. More importantly, Alaric took a high-value hostage, Honorius' sister, Placida.
The girl Stilicho had raised, who would later become a major player in Western politics.
But the ultimate impact was psychological. The sources tell us that no band of foreigners had entered the Eternal City to plunder for almost 8 centuries.
Not since the Gauls did it in 387 BC. It was a profound symbolic jolt to the entire world. The far-flung citizens realized that the great, secure power structure of the Roman Empire was so diminished that its heart could be overrun with almost no effort.
Think of the shockwaves felt across the entire Mediterranean world.
Jerome, the great Christian scholar, was translating the Bible in a remote monastery near Bethlehem in the east when he received the dreadful news. He wrote that his voice sticks in my throat. The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken.
For the people of the age, the one constant, the symbol of eternal civilization, had just crumbled. The final, catastrophic events of 410 bring us full circle to the philosophical response. The sheer horror of the sack demanded an explanation, particularly for Christians. If Rome, which had adopted the true faith under Theodosius, could be sacked, what did that mean for God's plan?
While Jerome was mourning, Augustine, in his role as bishop in Africa, was immediately confronted by citizens and refugees who blamed the catastrophe on Christianity itself.
Right. They argued that Rome fell because it abandoned the old gods and embraced the monotheistic God.
In response to this existential crisis of faith and state, Augustine began writing his magnum opus, The City of God. It would take him 13 years to finish, but the early sections written during this period provided the immediate, necessary intellectual framework for his survival.
What was his core argument?
Augustine concluded that Rome was not, and never had been, the eternal city. Rome was merely an earthly kingdom that had served God's purposes, and its time was simply past.
So he reframes the whole idea of what an eternal city is.
He does. He drew on the idea of dual existence and authority, stating that all cities of men exist side by side with the city of God, the unseen spiritual kingdom defined by faith and the promise of eternal life.
It's a foundational philosophical concept that redefined Western political thought. Men choose which city to occupy through their deepest desires.
And while the goals of the two cities might sometimes intersect, both want earthly peace, for example, their ultimate purposes diverge absolutely.
And he clarifies those diverging purposes brilliantly.
He does. The city of man, the earthly realm, seeks power and dominion and earthly glory, the very things Stilicho fought for and Alaric sought through conquest. Conversely, the citizens of God's city, the true eternal city, seek only worship and the glory of God.
So Augustine's definitive answer to the sack of Rome was this: the fall of the physical empire didn't mean Christianity had failed.
Not at all. It meant that the church was not and should not be bound by the fate of earthly power structures. The stone walls of the capital could be plundered, emperors could be murdered, but the city of God, the spiritual community, would endure forever.
And this has massive implications for you, the listener, far beyond 410 AD.
Oh, absolutely. By divorcing the destiny of the church from the destiny of the state, Augustine provided the intellectual blueprint for the survival of Western civilization. It allowed the spiritual authority, the nascent papacy, to claim a legitimacy that transcended temporary crumbling monarchies, setting the stage for the next 1,000 years of European history, where the church often acted as the sole source of stability.
That was truly a deep dive into 18 years that irrevocably shattered the Western world. Let's briefly recap the critical sequence for you. It all started with a political and religious clash at the Battle of the Frigidus.
The last unified act of the empire, which was immediately followed by Theodosius's death. That political and ethnic disdain led directly to Alaric's denial of high honor, triggering the creation of the Visigoth nation, that powerful act of ethnogenesis driven by shared resentment.
We saw the lethal feuds between Stilicho in the West and the East, marked by political assassination and legal decrees that officially codified the division.
Concurrent to this military chaos was the desperate yearning for certainty, pitting the Donatist fight for theological purity against Augustine's profoundly sophisticated concept of the mixed body of the church, accepting human flaws while maintaining divine grace.
And the final collapse accelerated with the cowardly retreat to Ravenna, the strategic betrayal of Stilicho, and ultimately the complete indifference of the central authority. A simple xenophobic refusal to grant a nation a small piece of land led to the catastrophic symbolic event of 410.
What's remarkable is how tightly geopolitical forces, the necessity of a grain shipment, the rise of a half-vandal general, were intertwined with fundamental ideological and theological questions, culminating in Augustine's response to the crisis.
This period proves that when the world outside becomes unbearable, finding a clear, defined, permanent identity becomes the most essential human endeavor.
So here is a final provocative thought for you to carry forward. We often rely on massive modern institutions, governments, global banks, large international organizations, and believe them to be perpetual and indispensable forces in our lives.
Right.
What contemporary institution, built to be eternal or too big to fail, might in reality be resting on foundations just as temporary and vulnerable as the walls of Rome turned out to be?
Something to mull over as you navigate your own complex world. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.